hey, I am not an intro kind of person. I can't do it. So today I originally had something else planned, but I posted a question on my Instagram and a bunch of my friends answered. I had like 4 people message me about doing this topic. I figured I'd just do it instead of the other one I was going to do. Like that one can just wait for another time. So by popular demand, I'm just going to jump right into it and talk about Medusa. So Medusa was a monster from Greek mythology, so we're back into the Greek mythology here. And the thing with Medusa's mythology is that it differs depending on either who told the myth or where the myth was told. So she was a Greek creature, but the Romans took basically like all of Greek mythology and just reappropriated it, and Medusa was one of those characters in Greek mythology that the Romans took and flipped the story around and changed it to suit their culture, I guess. So the reason I mention this is because to really get the most out of the Medusa mythology, you kind of have to know both the Greek version of the myth and the Roman version of the myth, because at a certain point, like when modern society learnt of mythology, everything got fused together in a way. So you kind of have to know both stories. That's just that. So the original-ish story of Medusa, or like the main, most famous Greek version of Medusa, was told by Hesiod, who was a Greek poet. So he basically told of the consummation of the 2 primordial gods, Phorcys and Keto. Primordial gods are kind of weird because they're the original gods, so they predate the Olympian gods and the Titans. So Phorcys and Keto made love one warm summer night maybe, and were gifted with 3 hideous monster children, the Gorgons. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of these names. So there's Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa, the 3 Gorgon triplets. So like the Gorgon sisters weren't the only like gross, disgusting babies these primordial gods had. They also had a few other gross, disgusting babies. One of them was called Echidna, not to be confused with the Australian monotreme. So I like read a bit about Echidna while I was kind of doing a bit of research, and she might actually have a better mythology than Medusa. So the original Greek version of the Medusa myth was she was born a Gorgon. She was born a gross monster. And in the Roman version, written by poet Ovid, which was like 300 years after Hesiod's version, he just ruined her origin story. And she didn't have a great origin story, but I still think being born a gross monster is better than this. So he told of a beautiful woman who worked in the temple of Athena, or Minerva. So she's working in the temple and she's like fucking pretty hot, I guess. And depending on what story you hear, Poseidon rocks up to the temple and they either have consensual sex or non-consensual sex. And keep in mind, like, Athena and Poseidon kind of have a biff. Athena doesn't get mad at Poseidon, she gets mad at Medusa. And so Athena punishes Medusa by turning her into a hideous monster and banishing her. Whilst I personally prefer the Greek story of Medusa's origin, the following mythology really requires you know both. Let's just, for the time being, say Medusa's born a horrible Gorgon monster. So generally Gorgons were described to be these like winged, they're always women creatures, and they've got like a serpent's tail instead of legs, and they've got serpents for hair. Generally their faces are described as like being really flat, kind of like Voldemort-y. They've got like protruding tusks, kind of like boars, and apparently they're just always described as having their like little snake tongue hanging out, like just flapping around. I don't know at what point it changed. I think like art kind of changed it a bit, because Medusa at some point started being depicted as like really beautiful. So her sisters were immortal and Medusa was mortal. Maybe it's because she was being punished for being so hot. But also it said that Medusa's powers were more deadly than her sisters. I'm assuming you know the Gorgon powers. You gaze upon their face and you turn to stone. And it doesn't really elaborate on that in anything I read. So are we assuming that either Medusa's powers are more deadly because like she's hot and you kind of like wanna see her? Or is it that her sister's powers are more slow acting and hers is like you're stone? You know, in like Pokemon when Ash is being turned to stone. Is it like that? Anyways, prior to like this base storyline, iconography and like motifs and like art and stuff of the Gorgon kind of date back quite a while back, like as far back as Babylonian times even. And there's not really a whole lot about them prior to the tale of Perseus. And I'm gonna have to tell the story of Perseus because it's really the only story where Medusa gets a little more info, and it's not even a lot, but it's kind of necessary if you want to know about Medusa's kind of like long-lasting effect on the plane of like Greek mythology. Okay, so here's the story of Perseus. I've really stripped it down to like focus solely on this one quest and his origin, so you know who he is. So Perseus is a Greek hero, and you'll never guess who his dad is. The big man himself, Zeus. At least 90% of Greek heroes are the fruit of Zeus, but never with like his actual wife. Okay, so Perseus's mother was a princess of Argos or Argive, and her name was Danae. She was the daughter of the king Acrisius, and he was told by prophecy that his daughter, her first son, would kill him. And so basically he did what any rational man would do and locked his daughter up in either in a tower or a chamber. But an important detail to know about, regardless if it's a tower or a chamber, is that there is some kind of sunroof. Remember that. So it's sound logic. It's just very loving and caring thing for a father to do. So she's in a tower chamber. That doesn't stop the king of the gods. Zeus just thinks she's the bee's knees. He thinks she's really hot. And so, yeah, we've established that Zeus cheats on his wife all the time. In this instance, he wants to have sex with this Princess Danae, but he doesn't want anyone to know it was him. So he comes to her in the form of rain. But not just any rain, golden rain. Here's just some proof that the ancient Greeks didn't know a whole lot about female anatomy, because Zeus just like, I'm just gonna say it, Zeus pissing on her got her pregnant. That really always happens. Don't you hate it when you get pregnant from someone else's piss? So she gets pregnant with the piss seed of Zeus. Obviously the king's gonna eventually find out. I don't know like at what level of neglect this is, but King Chryseus obviously found out because one day he went to visit her 9 months in, I guess, or over 9 months, and she had a baby, and he was like, what? So his next step of sound logic is to put his daughter and her baby in a box and throw that box into the sea. There's a lot of like instance in Greek mythology where someone wants someone to die, but they don't want to actually commit a murder, so they like do something that will somehow lead to their death eventually, but not at their own physical hands. But anyways, joke's on him, because Princess Danae and baby Perseus wind up in the Bay of Seriphos, and they're caught in a fisherman's net, and the fisherman's name is, get ready for this one, Dictys. Dictys gave Danae and Perseus shelter. He gave them a place to stay while they get their life back together. For some reason, he didn't want anyone in the kingdom of Seriphos to know that he had taken in these people that he'd captured in a fishing net. He kept their presence secret. And Dictys had a brother, and his brother was the king of Seriphos. And his brother's name was Polydectes. Really creative names coming from the parents of these two. Several years pass, and Danae and Perseus's existence in the kingdom of Seriphos is like secret. No one knows. But eventually Polydectes finds out, and instead of being angered by this, he fell in love with Danae like instantly. So I'm guessing like she was a 10 or something, because Zeus wanted so badly to get in her body somehow that he pissed on her, and then this king who would normally banish people who weren't citizens is just like automatically falls in love with her. So Danae had no interest in Polydectes whatsoever. She was very focused on being a mum, I guess. I would say Perseus would be in his like late teens at this stage, and it's rough raising a teenager, you know, especially a teenager who hasn't been socialized at all throughout his entire life. Anyways, so Polydectes is like, you know, constantly asking Danae out, constantly like, be my wife, let me take you out on a fancy date, let me like, you know, show you what it's like being queen. And she's generally, it's like nothing to do with any other factors. She's just not interested in Polydectes. But Polydectes is a king, so naturally he has a massive ego, and he just assumes that the only reason she's not getting with him is because of her awful son taking up all her time. And so his theory is like, if I get rid of Perseus, then Danae will like instantly want to marry me. He comes up with this plan, and it's so incredibly convoluted, and I'm going to struggle to pronounce these names. Bear with me. So here was Polydectes' story to Perseus. He told him he was going to propose to Hippodameia, daughter of King Eonomaus, who was king of Pisa in Elis. And on royal order, every citizen of Seriphos was required to give a wedding gift, and the requested wedding gift of everyone in the kingdom was a horse. Apparently, like, Hippodameia was a horse girl. And because Perseus was just poor, like he had literally just joined the rest of the kingdom, like after being hidden for like 17 to 18 years. He had no money, so he couldn't buy a horse. And so he was like genuinely worried that he would get in huge trouble for not supplying a horse, and he couldn't afford one. And so he goes to the king and he says, like, I can't buy a horse, but I will go and get you anything you ask. Lay it on me. And Polydectes is immediately like, I can't believe my plan is working. He sits there and he's like, well, I guess if you can't buy me a horse, you could maybe just get the head of Medusa instead. And I mean, getting the head of Medusa is quite a difficult task. Stealing a horse would probably be a lot easier. But like I said, this kid's grown up with only 2 people to talk to his entire life and has not really seen the outside world at all. And Polydectes is like fully aware that this task is impossible and he will definitely die either trying to get to Medusa or when he gets to Medusa. And Perseus just like he packs up his stuff, and like 2 to 3 days later he's off. He's like, all right, off I go. And he just like goes off on his adventure. Despite the fact that the location of the Gorgons is not known to anybody, not even a general, maybe if I head this way, it's completely unknown. For reference, a lot of scholars, they think that the Gorgon sisters lived in like a little cave off of Libya, which is in Africa, which is across the Mediterranean. So Perseus is just aimlessly wandering Greece, and he's just like walking, I guess, one day, and he comes across a very tall woman and a man wearing winged sandals, and these two people introduce themselves to Perseus as Athena, goddess of war, and Hermes, the messenger god. They direct him to go see these witches called the Grey, and the Grey are sisters of the Gorgons. And as well as like pointing him off to see these witches, he is gifted a bronze polished shield from Athena and a sickle made of adamantium from Hermes. And he goes, thanks, and he heads off to the Grey. This is just another instance of the the Disney Hercules movie, messing around with the mythology and like mashing together a lot of stuff. Because if you remember the Fates in the movie, they were like the old women who pulled the string and they cut it.
So sorry that I'm
late. We knew you would be. We know everything. Past, present, and future. Indoor plumbing. It's gonna be big.
And they were depicted as these like three very, very old witchy women who shared an eyeball. So the Fates did do the thing where they pulled the string and they cut it. But everything else is the Grey. They were three old witches. Between the three of them, they had one eyeball to share, and they also had one tooth to share. I don't know why. So Perseus gets to the location of the Grey. He walks in and he's like, where is Medusa? And they obviously aren't going to let up the location of their sister. But then he just like comes in and grabs their single eyeball and their single tooth and like, you can get it back if you tell me where Medusa is. Obviously, they need their single eye and single tooth to get by. And so instead of like just outright giving up the location of Medusa, they kind of go one better. I don't know, if I was the Grey and some guy stormed in and he was threatening to kill my sister, I would lie to him. They don't lie to him. They straight up are like, here's where Medusa is. But also, you should probably also go to this other place first because there's heaps of cool things there you can use to kill our sister with. They could have even just given the location of Medusa, let him go there, and then him get killed by Medusa because he's unprepared. But they point him in the direction to these nymphs. These nymphs are significant because they are hoarders of magical items. And so they have some valuable shit that Perseus could use. So Perseus gets to the nymphs in their like little forest, and they kind of also give more emphasis on the specific location of the Gorgons. Along with that, they give him a pair of winged sandals, and this was useful because he could fly, but it also made his steps silent. They also gave him a kibisis, which is a knapsack, kind of like Hermione's in the Harry Potter movies. It's like bottomless, it's impenetrable. It's a magical bag that you can put anything in. And while he's in this like woodland den, he notices this hat, this helm, and it is the helm of Hades. It is an invisibility hat. So now Perseus literally has everything he could possibly need to not fuck this up whatsoever. He is well prepared. So with the sandals secured to his feet, Perseus flies across the Mediterranean. It's a sizable gap. It would have taken ages, but he gets across there and there's no further info about the specifics. And he just like casually arrives at the cave of the Gorgons. It's kind of described like, so it's a cave, but inside the cave there's like a little gully. Nice place. Nice cave. And so he's armed with the adamantium sickle. He's got his bronze shield, which is polished so it's reflective. Important. So he's wearing his wing sandals and his invisibility hat. So he's literally not even there. Like, you can't hear his steps. You can't see him. Unless he sneezes, you wouldn't know he's there. The big thing with Medusa is you can't look at her. It's not like in the eyes, like you cannot look at her face at all, but you can look at her through a reflective object. So he's basically like maneuvering this shield to guide his way through this cave without having to like use just his passive vision because he cannot look directly at Medusa. There's like a story told that isn't actually of Greek mythology that Medusa looks at herself in in the mirror and is turned to stone. That's not a thing. The powers of Medusa don't work through reflective surfaces. So everyone's sleeping at the time, so I'm guessing it's like night, or maybe they just sleep whenever. They're all sleeping by the gully, like this spring, and it's like described as being really beautiful and serene. And Perseus just like very uneventfully swoops in right up to Medusa and takes her head clean off with the sickle. So this is probably the most ridiculous part of the story, and this is where the Roman version of the story kind of ties in. So Medusa is pregnant, and we are to assume it is Poseidon's offspring. And how do I tell this? When Perseus lobs off Medusa's head, her 2 babies just explode out of her neck and are simultaneously not even infants anymore. They are full grown. The first one was a man armed with a golden sword. He had the golden sword in her womb, maybe, who knows. And his name was Chrysaor. The second baby was Pegasus, the winged horse. And if you know anything about like Poseidon's mythology, horses are kind of like his thing. To summarize what happened, Perseus made it to the dreaded den of the Gorgons very easily, killed Medusa, took her head, and on her head being decapitated, a man with a sword and a horse burst out of her neck. So that's really the most you get from Medusa as far as like a story featuring her. That was the main mythology with Medusa, and she wasn't even a key character. She was more like just like an object. And I don't want to end the Perseus story there, because what happens after this event, it's very funny. Stuff happens with Perseus that is unrelated to this key plot here, so I'm not going to talk about it. But basically, he's on his way back to Seriphos to bring the head of Medusa to King Polydectes, and he's got his sick wedding gift that I'm sure the bride will just cherish forever. He gets back, and obviously he goes and sees his mother first to be like, I'm alive. And on arrival, Dictys, it just basically like lets up the whole like, here is what my brother has been doing. Basically, Polydectes has just been constantly harassing and trying to coerce his mother, and this makes Perseus furious. Dude can't take a hint. Furious Perseus storms up to the castle of Polydectes, and he bursts in, and him and his attendants are all sitting at a table having lunch or whatever, and he whips out the head of Medusa, and he's just like, hey everyone, look at this. And they all look and turn to stone instantly. And then after this, Dictys is then made king of Seriphos. So like Perseus and Danae are like, well, our work is done here. We're going to go back to Argos. And Perseus kind of decides, you know what, I don't need this severed head and this bronze shield anymore. I'm going to take him back to Athena. I don't know how. She gladly takes them because she hates Medusa, and she fuses the head of Medusa into her shield. Her shield is embellished with the head of Medusa, and that's why. So I said the full-grown man and the horse bursting out of Medusa's neck was the funniest part, but this part is also the funniest part. The prophecy told that King Acrisius would be slayed by his grandson, and he hears word that Danae and Perseus are returning to Argos. Perseus and Danae were like, you know, time has passed. It's time to let this beef between my dad and I settle. It's time to let go of the fact that he put me in a box with my newborn baby and threw me into the ocean. And so they go back to Argos with the intention of, they want to forgive him. King Acrisius hears word that Danae and Perseus are on their way back to Argos, and so he flees. And so they get back to Argos, he's not there, so they just kind of like don't bother looking for him anymore. Through circumstance, they decide to head to Larissa because Perseus wants to compete in these like athletic games, kind of like the Olympics, I guess. And so Perseus is doing discus, and he just kind of throws it and loses control over it, and so the discus flies off into the crowd and it hits a man in the head and instantly kills him. And that man in the crowd was King Acrisius. So the prophecy was fulfilled. And just on the topic of Perseus, he was related to other Greek heroes through lineage, including Hercules. His kids had Alcmene, who was Hercules' mother. He's his great-grandfather and also his half-brother, because it's Greek mythology. And just like a few little slices of information from Medusa, there was a period of Medusa wandering the lands. She wandered for quite a while, for a few years apparently, and just like hair falls out of our head of hair, the snakes would fall off of her head the same way. The mythology kind of like transferred into actual science, because there are 2 species of snake common to Africa now, named after Medusa. The first one is a venomous pit viper. I can't pronounce this. The Bothriopsis medusa. And then there's a non-venomous viper called the Atractus medusa. And as well as that, it was also said that a snake taken from the hair of Medusa kind of possessed the same abilities that Medusa had. And in the future, Perseus' great-grandson and brother, Hercules, was gifted a snake from Athena, and he then gave it to this woman who needed to protect her village, because Hercules had like military prowess, but instead of like using that to protect this woman, he gave her a Medusa hair and was just like, yeah, just get your people invading your kingdom to look at this and they'll just turn to stone. Like, I'm not actually going to help you that much, because he's Hercules. So that's basically all there is to talk of Medusa. That's Medusa for you. Thank you for watching. Do the all the things, the subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing. I say this every time, but like every bit helps. Mythology commentary isn't really that much of a thing on YouTube, so every little bit of engagement helps me a whole lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.